without further ado, I'll give you the man himself. Thanks.
Well, thanks. I appreciate being here, and particularly to have this conversation as part of the center here. And I got to give you a little background about me, then I want to give you a sense of how we are going to improv together as part of a conversation, because I think conversation is really about improv, and there's no way you can talk about jazz without a little improv. There's no way you can talk about jazz without a little love, and there's no way that I think you can talk about a university experience for undergraduates or graduates or community of people without both. And let me give you a sense of that. I am trying to do my best to recreate this concept that I've grown up with. It's called student development theory. People of my ilk grow up going to school, taking classes, and getting degrees in student personnel development, student personnel theory. Who has one of those degrees? Show me. Don't be ashamed. Hands up. All right, good. You know, I kind of went through a little bit of that as well. And I must admit, I'm a heretic when it comes to student development theory. I am one of those people who, the people in the field, if you will, say he is an odd duck. And here's why I'm an odd duck. I go way back to when I started to learn about this sort of stuff, when I started to look at the issues about cognitive development in undergraduate students, when I started to look at the environmental aspects of learning, the psychosocial development, all that stuff, news and press and all that kind of thing, I found myself very unfulfilled. I found myself looking and reading so much of this stuff and thinking to myself, it's missing a lot. It's missing me, and here's why it's missing me. It's missing me because I didn't see a lot of information or papers or anything else, books, theories, approaches to black males. I didn't see a whole lot of stuff about people who were going to college for the first time. I didn't see a whole lot of things about heart. I didn't see a whole lot of things about the unexplained. And I wanted to deal with the unexplained because I said we're dealing with a group of people who are human beings. And yeah, we can try and do what I think social science tries to do a whole lot of, and that is to put formulas on everything. And to ignore. And here's what I felt student development theory did for me. It ignored human expression. It ignored the way human beings come together in spaces. It ignored the way that human beings are going to create and recreate every year, every day, every minute in their lives, especially when they're young. And I didn't know a whole lot about it. I actually found that the market researchers in my life had more to teach me about young people in communities than the professors that I had who were trying to teach me about the residential environment, for example, and how people develop each year of their lives. I thought that the marketers, those people who want to sell you something, understood human nature, and particularly young people, far more than my professors did. Far more than any conference I went to and sat through a session for. And I said, you know, I've got to find a different way. So I'm here to be the heretic. True story. I'm here to say, that stuff is great, but I want to be a little bit like Miles Davis. You know, Miles Davis is that guy who said to jazz, I can play the original stuff. I'm classically trained. I can blow Stardust if that's what you really want to hear. I can play that old Congo Square stuff, and I appreciate guys like Wynton Marsalis who are going to stick a flag down and say this is where it stops. But it was Miles who decided that I could do some different things with jazz. I could turn my back on the audience and play, and look at the musicians who were there and give them cues. I could also make a statement by doing that, because art has to make a statement. I could take us to a different level and a different school if I start to push on this stuff a little bit, if I start to add a little bit to it. And so I became the heretic that said, I think that there are deeper concepts, human concepts, that are important. I think they come from music, and I also think that they come from the big universal concept that has been around that we struggle with a lot, love. And I'll talk a little bit about what I mean by love. But love, and of course not romantic love. That stuff gets you fired at a university. You all know that. Talk about a different kind of love we're talking about as students. Now, two things. First off, this is going to be a meditation. Right? This is how I've trained my mind to think a little bit about how to push a community, how to teach the folks I hope that I work with that there can be different ways that you can add on that knowledge base that you have that can still get us traction. It's how we can have a theory about an approach. So it's a meditation. The other piece too is we are going to improv a jazz piece, and improv from the standpoint that I am okay with you jumping in. I will ask questions, and I'm okay with you jumping in. I will make statements. I'm okay with you jumping in. If you want to add to this conversation, I got a lot of stuff I'm going to talk about, but please, jump right in. I'm okay if you feel a beat moving along a little bit and you catch that beat and you want to put something into that vibe, do it. One of the things as a skill that I think is very important here is that when we look at pulling communities together, it is about improvisation. It has to be about improvisation. The minute a university stops being about improvisation, forget it. Why are we here? You know, there's this thing I did growing up where I would go to a basketball court, and you always get asked this question, and I think musicians ask themselves the same sort of thing. You would always get asked at the basketball courts, I know you can dribble the ball. I know you can shoot the ball, but guys would always ask you, but can you play? And that meant something. Right? That meant something about the nature of understanding the game on a basic level, but at the same time, too, understanding the game in a way that you could interface with it, that you could make it up as you go. That was a question about improv. And musicians do that, too. I know you can give me the notes back. I know you got the standards, but, you know, the good old cats would ask you, yeah, but can you play? And many of people got kicked out of bands because they couldn't play. They could play the notes, but they couldn't play. And that's a real skill, and the best place to learn that is at a college or a university. And I think that certainly when we start thinking about community and those aspects of it, we gotta make it so that students walk out of here able to play, able to really play. So that's my meditation a little bit. Let me throw a couple other things too, as I think about playing with this. First off, I want to thank Hardin for coming up. This is his idea. It wasn't mine. Hardin said, listen, I want you to talk about jazz and love in higher education. And you know, it was this wonderful thing that I heard him once say. He talked to me about a faculty member he was about to hire. And this person was coming from a different part of the world in terms of industry, coming into an environment where now they had a lot of students in their lives. And this person asked, what was the advice, what kind of advice would you give me, Dean, as I start off teaching? And he said, real simply, you gotta love your students. You gotta love your students. And I thought, yeah, there we go. Now here's this other piece too. We are often afraid to tell people that. I was talking to Samantha a little bit ago, and she talked about how, she said to me, I love my students. And I said to her, people are afraid to say that. We are afraid to tell our students that we love them. We are afraid to tell each other that we love them. Why is that? Now's a great opportunity to jump in. Why is that? Robert.
Well, people look at you at different ages.
Say again?
People would take it differently at different ages.
Okay, talk to me a little bit more.
My first semester, I came and I was teaching a graduate course in electromagnetics,
Right.
and people would show up at office hours telling me about their marital problems and what a hunk their husband was, and things aren't working the same way. And, wow, my God, my beard's white and my hair's gone. You know? So if I went and I said I love my students then, wow.
That'd be a bad idea.
Yeah. I love my students, but I've got kids who are college age, and wow, are they a lot of fun? I
Why?
think they see it, but I don't have to tell them.
Why else are we afraid, though? See, I think they don't necessarily know it. I think we have to say it to them. And sometimes we say it with our body language. Sometimes we say it with our eyes. Sometimes we say it with our voice.
Yeah.
But they have to know. I think they have to know and walk out and say, my professor loves me, my teacher absolutely loves me.
Well, if you fall over yourself trying to engage it, then you feel it. Talk's cheap.
Okay.
It also, saying that as a level of deep personal commitment in a situation that is predicated on making evaluations. Do you really belong on an ongoing basis? Different institutions do this differently. So how can I say I love you, but I'm also going to judge you? And that's tough to hold those two together.
We talked about this phrase, I love you, but I'm not in love with you right now.
It makes you vulnerable to admit that, and they might not love you back as a teacher.
There's that
That's the biggest fear.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you can't do it unless you're willing to say, okay, you know, I mean, that's fine with me, but, you know.
Great big concept
If
with
you
love.
can't turn the other cheek, forget it, that's right.
Well, great big concept with love, I think in this kind of environment, is about the vulnerability. It's about the struggle. People forget, I think that love has a big struggle that goes with it too. Ongoing, constant.
I was thinking about the different sort of power levels, so to speak, in that relationship, and you know, making yourself vulnerable emotionally, but potentially putting yourself in that lower position when I'm an administrator as opposed to a faculty member, but you know, still you need to be clear that you're the one who's going to be setting certain requirements, whether you're evaluating them necessarily or not. But yeah, you have to be careful about that balance of power. It's like when I was an undergrad, you're an RA, you're friends with the people on your floor, but you've got to also kind of maintain that respect. There's a little bit of a power thing there.
I agree with Shelley, and this point about vulnerability, the more that we delve into their lives kind of opens the door for them to delve into ours, and how much are we willing to share, you know, once we start asking them about boyfriends and girlfriends, how much are we willing to share about our own personal lives as well. And so that setting up that kind of that context of love between one another opens up maybe some of those conversations that maybe we're not ready to have.
Let me give you a sense of what I mean by love. How about that? I'm talking about the love that we have for muses. When I say muses, I know the pamphlet talks a little bit about a few of them. Edgar Helms, Lila Robinson Sawtelle, Anna Howard Shaw, Martin Luther King, muses right around here. People who I think, and by the way, I think a muse is someone who stirs our intellect. And I think these are folks who really hold love from a place, particularly from a place that I'm going to call Gandhian. And again, Edgar Helms. Edgar Helms was that student who became legend for starting Goodwill Industries. He started it as part of a project as a graduate student. Anna Howard Shaw, the woman who not only became one of the first doctors, who was a woman in the country at a time when you couldn't be a doctor as a woman, but she was also deeply engaged in the suffrage movement as well. Lila Robinson Sawtelle, the first lawyer in Massachusetts who had the General Court of Massachusetts, that's the legislators, change the law so that women could practice law. And we know who Martin Luther King is. I think that these are folks who brought that Gandhian concept of love as part of their role as muses. So I think the campus has this notion about what Gandhi's love was all about. And, you know, I sort of sat down and said, let's think about this a little bit. Gandhi's love was about the way to truth and love. Truth was love. Nonviolence was love. He talked about this thing called the law of love. And he says the law of love operates like the law of gravity. It's going to operate whether we recognize it or not. And he suggested that what we should do is recognize it. He talked about how the law of love says that fear is contradictory. He talked about how love would always win over violence. And he went through history. If you read any of Gandhi's things, he points out that we haven't recognized as human beings that violence doesn't work. Never solves a problem. Hasn't solved a problem. And we know that he talked about his truth force. And I want you to think about his truth force, because Martin Luther King adopted the truth force too. People who said, I know that these folks who we oppose, and by the way, he wouldn't say oppose, he probably would say, I know these folks that we need to re-educate or to help live up to what their moral being could be, to live up to what a country says it should be, are going to go so far as to kill us. And if need be, we must love them at the point where they strike us. If need be, we must love them to the point where they kill us. But we cannot strike back, and we cannot die with hatred in our hearts. And that's love. And he says that not only is love, it's the truth. And it's the truth that gives us that love overall. He talked about how love wrestles with the world, how love is something that you must wrestle with in yourself. He talks about the emotions that have to be mastered with love. And certainly he says that this notion of hate the sin and not the sinner is easier said than done. Much easier said than done. Love, he said, wasn't for cowards. And that he said that this is where concepts of bravery and nonviolence, they spring from love. He also points out, too, love should be full of struggle. Love should be full of suffering. Love should never demoralize. And that the real power in life is achieved by acts of love. The true acts themselves. And then we have this man, this wonderful student, this wonderful young person. And you gotta remember, Martin Luther King Jr. was a pretty young person when he left here. After he'd had conversations with Edgar Brightman and Dr. DeWolf here, to give up the possibility that he could be a college professor and go and say, it's time for me to formulate a real world view for myself that I can take to some other people. And that worldview was about love. Great application. You know, if you haven't read A Letter from a Birmingham City Jail this year, so I think you should read it all the time. I hope you've read it this year. If you haven't, read it this year and next year and every 6 months and every 4 months. Talk about a learned person. It is the quintessential, you know, this is where a place like Boston University should be proud. Say, it takes a very skilled person to put that together. Where he talks about applying. I think he talks about the laws of love in the context of real-world society. I think his final speech as well to the mountaintop applies the laws of love to politics, real politics. Where he talks about poverty, militarism, consumerism, and racism. But he does it in a way that really pulls in Gandhi's ethics of love. And so one of the things that I ask is whether or not we have amongst us or are cultivating the new muses on this campus and with the people who we teach. Who is the new Anna Howard Shaw? Who's the new Lila Robinson Sawtelle? Who's the new Edgar Helms? And are there possibilities that we send out into the world the next Martin Luther King? And do we know them? Have we identified them? Where are they? Now, Dean Ellenwood sent me a quote. Go ahead, jump in. Jump in.
I would be really scared of anybody who felt they could do that. Because we need to do this love thing, but students are worried that they're in a competitive environment. The whole, training engineers, the criticism we get is we don't train people that work in teams in school, because everything's individual effort, courses, grades, everything. I'd say, listening to the administration, we're competing, where are we ranked? We're great. The people we're talking about, that was when B was at computer school. Where do these people commute from? And we've gone great. Look at our rankings now as opposed to then. So I think the love really has to start from people. And as soon as we start ranking people, as soon as you have a way of quantifying like this guy or that guy, people are going to game the system. Like, don't try and measure this. Go check out your alumni, see who's wonderful, and don't. I'm not sure you will have anticipated it, or it just. MLK is fantastic, I know, but I think there's a lot of people doing wonderful things, and it's not apparent during their student days here, or maybe they got it indirectly from really inspiring teachers. And maybe people didn't recognize those teachers.
Well, let me throw in the contrary there. Your dean, Ken Luchin, is doing something I think pretty wonderful. He's talking about this concept of the citizen engineer.
Yeah.
And I think that's a wonderful concept to think about. Ken Luchin is saying it is not enough for you, engineer, to walk out of here with your nice new ring on and your certification and to go into industry and put a little money in your pocket. That's good, but it's not enough. He's talking about real leadership in the society. He's saying that engineers move the society forward. Engineers are a part of human expression and they make it possible. You know, an iPhone for some people is empowering. And guess what? That's not design, that's engineering in that, right? And he's saying, yeah, that's one way you do it, but this is also about engineering in respect to things like a Peace Corps. This is engineering in respect to systems for how people go to school. This is engineering for the sake of solving problems for the society. And I think he's saying, if I understand him correct, that our problem-solving skills as engineering, we taught you how to go out and help with those problems of the world, and don't think that it's beyond your province because it's social or social-like, and it's not tinkering with something highly specific. Don't think it's beyond your province, that maybe if what you do, it carries some real social significance. I think that's a wonderful kind of thing, and you're getting that from the top of grid engineering.
Yeah, but I think we have to tell students that, but I think I think it's dangerous for us to claim that we are the ones giving it to them.
Okay, why is that?
Gandhi had life experience. I think students have amazing life experiences that drive them, far greater than what they need to be successful here. And you know, sometimes people just when they're doing the most remarkable things, they can't talk about it. They may be grieving in some other way. And what drives amazing people is not necessarily because somebody told them, or they know it when they got that feeling, and they don't have to be told.
We should write books about the mentors in these people's lives. We should be looking at the book about all the people along the way. Gandhi didn't get to be Gandhi just through some mystic force, maybe a little bit, but we don't all have those Siddhartha moments where we see the things in life that are really problematic and come to this grand realization. Most of us, I think Gandhi, King, Shaw, Helms, all those folks included, they had professors. They had people in the neighborhood. They had folks who were saying to them, let's think a little bit more about that, or you can do this. And I think that we don't do enough to understand the role and the real power to that. Robert, you are inspiring somebody out there, right? And inspiration has got to be part of your job.
And people have inspired me. I mean, there's students that think they knocked me off my feet.
Yeah, there you go.
I can give you an example, but that's far. I think I've been off. Yeah.
I was going to pick up on the fact that it isn't leading a movement that we're just talking about in our very humble way. It would be just asking a student questions.
Oh,
Just asking, well, why are you doing what you're doing? That's the only thing that I think is one way to do it, on an individual, very innocent kind of way.
Right.
It doesn't mean you have the answers, but people ask me along the way, well, who are your role models? And at the time, nobody had asked me that ever. And then I thought, well, who are they? So I sat with that a long time. Our students, for instance, will ask, well, why we have a lot of scholarship students, and they have an answer, which is really strange to me. We deal with a lot of scholarship students, and they're going back to their own countries. They'll be engineers, but they want to give to their country and their society. So sometimes it astounds me that they have answers. It's just asking questions in a very non-authoritative way. You know.
Smaller classes do that.
Plays that role. Large classes do too.
Yeah, I think it's not one or the other. I think sometimes it's lighting a fire, sometimes it's fanning it, sometimes it's just giving it room to burn, and maybe just validating our students and that fire that's within them. But for some of them, sometimes you need to give them a little bit of a push to move in a direction that maybe they want to but haven't thought enough about how to actually go about doing that. And some of the things we can do is have those conversations with them about how they can really impact the world in a meaningful way that also matches with their beliefs and values as well.
And to challenge them. You know, I think we need to learn in graduate school, for those of us who do this student affairs stuff, how to challenge people, how to be interesting, and what it means to be interesting, what it means to push someone to the point where they say, you are a challenging person, and you are an interesting person. You are a challenging person because you really understand ideas. You know, I've often wished that my student affairs training could have been about really understanding the whole wealth of human ideas and how they develop so that I could push people a little bit more. I haven't read enough to be doing this job. And I don't think a lot of my colleagues have read enough. I don't think enough of my colleagues have experienced enough to be able to say, here's how I can push this particular student and help light that passion. And I think that's loving. You know, there's where that loving comes in. You love me enough to know enough and to stay up on it enough to push me, to challenge me, to stretch me, to be able to improv a little bit with me. A very important thing. Now, let me just talk a little bit about two things in jazz that I love. There's this one concept called timbre. It's actually spelled T-I-M-B-R-E, timbre. Anybody know what timbre is? It's sort of the quality and character of the sound. That's why I wanted to make sure that word came in today, because we're talking about quality and character. Right? And it's about the quality and the character of the sound. That's distinct from, say, pitch or anything else. And think about that. That's timbre says something more about who hears the sound and how a society hears the sound than it says anything about the sound itself. Timbre, the quality and character of a sound. So I got this quotation from that Steve Ellenwood sent me. And this is from John Schroeder. A university is what college becomes when faculty don't care about the students. A university is what college becomes when the faculty don't care about the students. A university is what college becomes when the faculty don't care about the students. To me, that says something about quality and character. Now, I happen to disagree with that. I happen to think we could work against that. In fact, I think a lot of the work that I and all of us try to do is to say, no, we've got it. Right? We know what we mean by college. Right? Usually we mean small, bucolic, closed-in, simple-minded, everybody working in the same way, kind of like that place down at the end of the Green Line. Oh, I'm sorry. But you know, that's that feeling that we have. Because people say in those kinds of environments, folks care about you there. The smaller we can make it, the more apt people are to care. I'm not sure that that's the case. There's some quality to that. And there has to be a level of quality to that. And there also has to be a level of change that goes with that. I'm one of those folks who says, no, university's a place where you can have more options for those kinds of things. There are more options for care. There are more people here who can care for you. And there are more people here who can show you different ways that you can receive that love, that care that you need to have. We also will be more expansive in that. And then there's this other concept too, improv, that I keep talking about. I think that it's that important kind of skill. It's, I think especially now, I see so many folks who just play on the notes, but they're not playing. It's that notion where you get a sense to create. And I think one of the things we should push students more to do, and what's important when we think about the concept of love, when we think about the concept of how we teach them and move them forward, we have to say to them, my job here is to make the justifiable case for you to create. You should create and make those choices that go with how you create. I think also improv means that you've got to have a sense of what the taste of the times are all about. You have to have a sense not only in the real classical and specific, but also to improv real well. You've got to be able to say, I know something about the quality and the character of the sound that people want to hear right now. I got to have a sense of timbre. I think that also improv is about being smart. You got to be smart to improv. You got to know stuff. And what's more, you got to practice it. You got to practice it as much as you want. Now, here's the other thing, too. why am I so into jazz? You know, for me, I started to take my student development stuff and look at it from the lens of jazz. For me, for some reason, when I would sit in classes about human spirit and human condition and how people learn, jazz just kept coming to me. And why? Because I think it is about the quality and the character of people and the way that people improv. If you don't know about jazz music, you know that I think that jazz music is wonderful, that it is American music. We talk about ethnic music that's ethnic to the American culture, jazz. Jazz grew up in the swamps in New Orleans. Jazz comes out of that blues tradition, and on some levels, we're all blues. On some levels, jazz is about pulling in music from a whole lot of experiences, which is what we are. And it is the music of, you know, often you say it's the music of black folk, but it's the music of folk in this country. It comes from the notion that people could just rub some things together. It comes from the notion that people have a heartbeat and could hear that and amplify that in some way, that people could clap and snap and sing. It's jazz. We have been doing and making jazz music, but we decided at some point out of Congo Square we would make sure that we would put it out all together. Jazz, I think, is about mixing and remixing quite a bit. We don't realize that I'm one of these folks, and the hip-hoppers out there would hate me for saying this. To me, hip-hop and rap is the new jazz. I think it's an evolution of what jazz music is. And I don't think folks even realize that, but I think it really is. And it's about a voice. It's about an American voice overall. And jazz allows you that room to experiment a little bit. If you listen to a range of jazz, some of it is, you know, you just can't take it, and others of it just work for you. But what's great about jazz is this notion of swing in jazz. To me, swing is about really finding passion. When you really can play, when you get some good jazz going, you say a couple things. You say those cats are killing it, but you also say they're swinging right now. And that's when they really got it moving. That's when everybody's on and they figured it out and they've looked at each other and said, that's it, keep going, Harden, you keep taking it right now because you got it right now and I can back you up. Play, the people are moving with us, you're swinging at that point. And on some levels, I think what we're trying to do with all the students that I know the students I encounter, I want to make sure they can leave here ready to swing. Hopefully they swing while they're here. Hopefully they got some class, some subject that's making them swing. Hopefully they got that job too that's going to make them swing. Although that might come a little later. But you know, you want them to swing. You want them to know that they can swing. You want them to know that they can play. And I had always looked at the metaphor as being that. And I wonder if we're really ready to make that more something that we do. I want you to think about that time when you have had a chance to swing. Because I think we all get a chance to swing a little bit. Anybody not swing yet? Not know when you swing? Anybody? Truly can say, yeah, I've never had that experience of being able to say, I had a chance to swing today, or yesterday, or earlier this morning, or whatever it might be. And I want that to happen. Even better, I want you to swoon a little bit too with what it's about. And so I spend a lot of time trying to make sure that people think about this notion that through a musical concept called jazz, and a few of these concepts, timbre, improv, jazz itself, and through this concept of Gandhi's love, that we should have a way that we look at how we interact with these young people to empower them. And here's what I mean by empowering them. Help them to understand where real meaning is in their lives. Help them to find the sorts of things that give them the power. And again, that power that's about a sense of passion, that's about a sense of love in their own hearts, that will move them to where they need to be. And that means you have to do a whole lot of things that might be a bit unconventional. Things like talking to people, and talking to people in contexts that are very different than what we grew up learning would be appropriate context. I go way, like I said, I'm an odd duck. I go way out of the way. I think that we've got to have conversations in pubs as much as we have conversations in classrooms. We've got to have conversations on a bench in a dark space as much as we've got to have those in a dining room around a whole lot of people. Those conversations have to be one-on-one, and you've got to use language that works in with it as well. Those conversations have to push people somewhere, and they have to be honest and frank. It means you got to put that time in to do it in different ways, and I know that's hard. And I also think it means that at times you got to say words like love. Probably when a person's most vulnerable. I find that whenever I talk to people about love, I tend to be in a very vulnerable spot, or they are. Students tend to be in very vulnerable spots, and I think they need that pick-me-up, and I think they do understand that, no, I'm not trying to date you. That's not what I mean. I don't mean romantic love. I'm not talking about Cupid. I'm talking about something else. Now, by the way, there are times, too, when I deal with students where they come to me and say, Dean, can I hang out with you? You seem to be around a lot of people I'd like to know. Can you help me with my love a little bit? Which I say, no, it's not my problem. It's not my business. Now, if you want to talk about some Gandhi, I'd be more than happy to chat with you a little bit. Maybe you should get those people that you like in the same room and talk about Gandhi a little bit, and maybe that'll help you out. But I'm not going to be the one that does it. But it's got to be the conversation. Again, I think conversation is really improvisation at its best with a group of people. I want to push them to do more of that. So why don't we just take it from there and start to talk a little bit more? You take it, man. You take the swing.
What I get to do is try to say, okay, in response.
Go for it.
It's called a response. And I think Dean Elmore has asked us in an environment that is in many ways publicly represented as a classic, predominantly white institution, where our value as objects in each other's life tend to dominate the public discourse. What is your SAT score? Are we so proud with our selectivity rate? Our yield rate? What are we going to do to make our economic model? Right? Where are people going in terms of their career? What are the schools that we value most? Are those the ones who are putting people in the field of service, or they're the ones who are putting in the field that they're going to have an impact in the economic world? So SMG versus, let's call it theology, or maybe the School of Education. So, that's a public discourse. And Dean Elmore has said, okay, can we, in a modern university, in a major urban area, begin to act as if our relationship as subjects, people to people? So I'm looking at my object relationship professional over here. Can we treat each other as subjects? How do we do that? Can we create classrooms where people are coming in totally as a person with whom I'm going to grow, not just a person whom I'm going to teach? And so one of the things that I wonder about as we move into this technological world, which in many ways, when we hear about the dangers of technology, is so often phrased in terms of how it's going to move us away from each other, how we're going to be on our smartphone, which I just saw in the drawing, while I try to keep up with the notes and getting them down. As we're in the smartphones or tablets, as we're more interconnected, what will technology bring for us? And one of the things that, if we're going to follow through on this image, that we want to become a university where people will come to become somebody, not just something. Can we use the technology in this of MOOCs and from classrooms to really commit to a pedagogy that's about people coming to learn skills, not just to transfer what I know as a teacher, which is how we're currently formulated, but how do I begin to create environments where the goal is to get people to know how to do things in the world as they become somebody? Will technology really allow us to facilitate this moment where we're really subjects in each other's lives? And how scary that will be. Right? Think of our faculty, student services, how scary this proposition we're going to make is that I can't come from my protected stance of power and privilege, right? So I have to come, and as a knowledgeable person, I have to engage with you as a person and find something that we do together as we build your skill set. I think it's a very scary proposition, and I'd be really interested to see how is what people allow you to do in student affairs. Ken, you can go to the public. Ken, you can take that machine and you take them up on that first day. That's great what Ken's doing. Am I going to do to join that world? And how do we get an academic faculty to really move to the point? Because they're going to have to take leadership in this Gandhian approach to the subject. So it's a big challenge. Thank you for sharing. That's what I hear. That it's a powerful image, very attractive. Most of us in the room know that it's attractive to us. We hear probably before that. But to really become an institution in the modern world that is predicated on theory, that it's relationships first, how I help you become somebody, not something that's driving us.
Well, you know, if we could redefine, some of this is about defining the expectations, you said it, and that expectation is that you come to a university also to become somebody. And that also means changing the conversation. Right now, the conversation about education is about an economic conversation, right? You come to university for an economic reason. And I don't think the discourse in the society has quite come to recognizing and acknowledging that you should also come to a university for the societal benefits of that. I mean, the society needs people to be educated. Society needed me to be educated. It really did, because I would have been roaming and doing something else, probably highly problematic at this point in my life. Right? You needed me to be educated, and we all did. It got me off the street. You want to be off the street. But I think also we need to tap that talent. The other piece too is we don't talk about the moral aspects of education. We're afraid of that. And we haven't. We really haven't even touched that conversation. Look, just the whole, and in part because there's some things that are just these real hindrances for us. This is probably a liberal place. Middle to liberal. Liberals have a really tough time saying the word and moral, talking about morals. And they've let people hijack the conversation about that a little bit. There's got to be a moral conversation about what a university experience could and should be for individuals and human beings. Again, that's a societal benefit for people to think morally about who they are. We want people who graduate from this place to be able to have moral conversations, to be able to look back at the moral conversations that have taken place in the past and to move forward. I'm a lawyer. And lawyers, first off, I went to law school looking for justice. I never found it. Just didn't find it. It was me learning about how to do a bunch of transactions. And it was also about me learning in a way that was highly specific. In law school, you don't learn about poor people. People who bring cases are not poor people. I never saw a case that a sharecropper bought. I never saw a case that a rape victim bought. I never saw a case from an international, from a country about the way we ravaged another country. You don't see those kinds of things because those people can't afford systems. And so you don't learn about those sorts of things. And yet lawyers do more moralizing than you can imagine. Because law is about morals. We won't admit that. So education has to have a conversation about the moral benefits to the society as well as the general benefits to the society as well as the economic aspects of the society. The hard part too is that when we start to have these conversations, and it's great that you bring up the technology. This is a great book, by the way, I would recommend you all read. It's called You Lost Me. And it's actually about moral education from the standpoint of churches losing young people. It's a great analysis that they did about young people and why they don't go to church and why they are afraid to say that they're religious, or certainly why they're afraid to affiliate. And I love that because some aspects of the book talk about how churches, large institutions seem to be afraid of technology, seem to not be able to use technology as a way not just to spread information, but to pull people into face-to-face conversations. There's a great question to ask ourselves, and this is where the future might be. Can you do higher education without a face-to-face interaction with people? And I think that's the big conversation right now. Can this be done? Can higher education be done specifically without a face-to-face, without a one-on-one? That's some people will say absolutely, and other folks will say, not if you want real education. It can't happen that way. And as you know, I love the online world. I think there's a whole vast community in the online world. Fortunately for me, it has, I think, pulled more face-to-face interactions than the other way around. Much, much more. More than I could do just on the ground by myself. Not only been able to spread information, but been able to get information and get a chance to interact with people. And I think we're still, this is all nascent stuff, and we're still trying to figure out why it works, how it works, how it can work to our benefit or not work to our benefit, and then, you know, what's more, whether we keep using it or not. But there's this real basic conversation, and I wonder whether we're losing young people, and in fact losing them while they're here. Are we becoming church for them? And where do they go for conversations about the big questions? Can you get those online? I don't know, I've actually went on to edX, and I've been taking this course that Michael Sandler, I think is his last name, over at Harvard does, called Sandel. Justice. I think he does a pretty good job online with this thing. I was surprised. I was shocked. I said, how are we going to talk about justice online? I think he actually does a good job. Try it out. It's a free course. It's free. And it's a big, unruly subject. And I think he does it probably as well as far better than I expected it to be done. But I wonder will people continue to turn to those few examples like that for having these big conversations, or will they be able to come to places like this to have those big conversations that ultimately they have to have? I think unfortunately we send a lot of people out into the world without having those big conversations. And so we keep having the conversation over and over again, and it doesn't seem to get any more informed. And I think maybe, I don't know if it's evolution or what, but we seem to move forward a little bit. But I really see our national leaders out in the forefront pushing the society to have these conversations. Maybe because part of it is that we haven't had these conversations at times like this when we can have them, in places like this where we can have them. And maybe where face-to-face might be a little bit better about some of these conversations overall. Thoughts? Go for it.
Where does failure fit into this? So when you come to love,
Yeah.
people's biggest anxiety is fear of failure.
Yeah.
School,
Was that
everything.
romantic? Is that romantic love?
Or, yeah, I guess, yes. It is. So, but school is, well, you know, I mean, marriage after 30 years is, you know, more dramatic
I
love.
don't know what you're saying there, but not with my wife.
Okay, well, I mean, maybe I'll stick to school. So, my daughter, my eldest daughter, will say the most brutal thing I ever did to her was she was in grade 4. She used to come home crying because my wife and my father-in-law would speak French. She didn't understand. She took a French course, came home with an A. And I said, oh, you got an A, so does it mean you can speak it? And I said, I thought you wanted to be able to speak French. And I always told my kids, if you don't get your A's or good grades, you burn bridges. That's fine. I mean, I've been there. But if you get your A's, it doesn't mean you know what you're doing. And I had to do that. I did it too early with her. Well, she's at a PhD program in Berkeley. You know, she came out of Europe fine. But I had to do that because I didn't want to change. I didn't want them to get grades to keep me happy. And then I'm teaching here, and so this is the flip side. I have this student who he's really good. And I tell him, well, you know, why don't you take a graduate course? Because if you're going to grad school and you get burnt in your grades because you took a really challenging course, somebody's got to be an idiot not to have that in your favor. He says, no, I can't because I'll lose my financial aid.
Because of his GPA.
Yeah, his GPA. And I said, you know, it's the hardest thing. I mean, I was really lucky when my daughter's here. She's a professor's brat. She can take educational risks. And here you are, you're a really strong student, and you're scared to take risks. And the student was incredible. He couldn't afford to go to grad school. I mean, we've had a great effect on each other. One thing I did was, I was really bought a book. And 5 weeks later, I was singing praises to this book. And he says, yeah, it's a fantastic book. And I turned to him in class, and he's really good. You suck. You're just saying that because the professor said it's a great book. No. He pulls out his backpack and see it. I said, I'll give you 1 week to tell me why you think this book's really fantastic. So then he came back with an essay of George Orwell on how professors and politicians abuse the English language. The most amazing. And I said, the book is not like this. It's the most sophisticated stuff, and it reads like a newspaper. And it's the opposite of what Orwell was criticizing. And I said, thank you, because I've been singing his praises to this book like an idiot for 30 years.
What's the name of the book?
Electromagnetic Theory, Julius Stratton,
Okay.
1948.
Okay.
He became
Oh, I
president
love
of
that
MIT. No, I mean, it's the last book on the subject.
Can you now read it?
Well, he became president of MIT. He started the RAD lab at MIT, the whole radar effort. And it's the last book in the subject that really reads well. But he's now NSTAR. He's really into green energy. It's really being able to shake a student up, but in a safe way. And but this fear of failure is their academic hope. And as a parent, when your kids fail, you're there for them. All places, but here we're really focused on success, and students know that they can't afford to fail, and that's where the conversation might not be as real as we hoped it would be. Yeah.
A small thing I'll pick up, and I'm going to try to say something about jazz. I think you have to be careful when you say that kids are afraid to fail. I'm thinking about the Rutgers men, most of them black, who have just experienced the most horrific experience at the hands of a bastard white coach who was fired today. And they weren't afraid to fail. They are imprisoned, given their scholarship. They couldn't even retaliate against this guy. And you know that even the smallest point guard could throw him through the window. So you have these big black men having to take this crap from a fascist guy, and the university responds first with a 3-game suspension and $50,000 and public. Anyway, here's what I want to talk about.
And by the way, think about the ways we do imprison our students.
That's why I mentioned
Not quite to that extent.
Well, oh God, no.
Right.
But
grades might be one of those ways. Assessment might be one of those ways.
Well, I make it very clear to students, I'm here to teach, not to evaluate you.
Yeah, but you have to evaluate.
Yeah, but that's not necessarily evil. I want the light bulb. I'm interrupting you.
You and I have had this conversation, and you're calling a lot of thoughts up in me. One of which is that I really do believe that those philosophers who say that we are the stories that we tell, and that the stories that we tell help us find meaning of what it is to be and what it is to be a student or a man or a woman, whatever. But the story requires someone to bear witness to it. And the great people in our lives have not only wonderful stories, but they bear witness to us. So I was rescued by a school in Chicago. It was a caring place, and if ever there was a concept of caritas, it was that school. I think a lot of that quality of that caritas exists in the school of education.
Right. What do you mean?
I mean that there are a lot of people, and significantly, because I forgive the sexist bias, I expect it from women. I know that this kind of love will come from women. But I think that there are a lot of men in the schools who are not afraid to care for one another and their colleagues and their students. Dan Davis, Steve Ellenwood, Phil Tate, Scott Side. There's a lot of them. And our dean. When the dean was interviewed, forgive me, Hardin, when the dean was interviewed, one of the things that I saw, he gave fabulous answers to this to the search committee. But when he spoke about his wife and his children, his eyes grew very big, his tone changed. He sat up in the chair, and it was almost as if he was saying, well, now you're asking me about something that I really care about. And that care is something that I guess I fear, Ken, that a lot of boys, not just poor boys, or black boys, or Hispanic boys, just boys, don't have the vocabulary for caring and expressing their caring. So the feelings are in there, the music is in there, but they just need men and women to, almost in an articulating way, to draw it out of them. And partly what's coming out is all the sadness of their life, all the hurt of their life, all the fears of their life, and their intense desire to be loved and to love. So you could say that one of the reasons I don't want to tell you I love you is because I'm afraid you'll turn away from me and you won't look at me. But if I could reach a point in my life where I say, I cannot fail if I tell you that I love you, because it doesn't really matter what you say. I don't need the exchange in this moment. I just need to communicate to you that I love you, and I'm going to be here for you for eternity. And this, I think, Ken, if I might say, I think this is what you do with the students. You, in that loving nasty way, you and I had lunch about this, you show them through your eyes, you're safe here. Hardin has that quality. A lot of people have that quality. Look at my eyes, and you're safe. As a final note, I'm sorry to go on. I saw a really ugly, horrible, wretched, powerful movie the other night. It's called Kill Me Softly. Brad Pitt made it. It's violent. It's vicious. And it's about men who kill for a living. They're mafia hitmen. And they do it. James Gandolfino is fabulous. And did you see it? And Brad Pitt is marvelous in it. And I'm thinking, holy Brad Pitt. How did Angelina allow him to make this movie? And as it goes on, you realize it's a metaphor for what he fears America has become. Until the very end, his final words of the movie are, he says to this guy in the bar, remember, America is not a country, it's a business. And if universities become totally, I know there's got to be a business. If it becomes a business, then you lose the humanity and the jazz stops. Because for me, the jazz is just the music of the stories. Does that make any sense? Did I ramble?
No, great.
You know, Tom, it's, you probably saw, many of you probably saw this, I saw this report last week that just, it got to me. And maybe it got to me because I was one of these people, but they talked about how there are a number of young people out there, often poor, who are smart enough to go to a pretty good college, and they don't even apply because no one says to them, you know, you're smart enough to go to college. And they said that presence was so important in this whole, just the presence. And they said, you know, it's just that notion that somebody near them says, you know, you should apply to, and you could do really well. I think they estimate something like 34% of people in certain communities have the wherewithal. And part of it, too, is they think in their minds, too, I can never afford it. That's that other piece. And certainly the study goes on to show that if they got into a more elite institution, they wouldn't have to worry about affording it. People take care of you in those sorts of instances, particularly given their income levels, but they hadn't even thought about it at all. Mm-hmm. And I think you're so right, Tom. So much of this, particularly from young men, is that no one said that to them. I mean, I've even said, I once got into trouble where I had said that even that kid who, there's a point in my life when I was working, doing some work, doing survey research, and did some survey research with what we would call skinheads, classic skinheads. And, you know, the thing that struck me was nobody has been in their life to say to them, you are worthy of somebody's attention. You are worthy of somebody else's meaning. Yes, we do care about you. They haven't had people doing that. And so I wondered how much the paths that they choose or the paths that they get forced into are about them not having anybody who just stops them on the bridge and says, hey, look, you don't have to go over there. There are a whole lot of other places you can go, and you also don't have to be afraid and hate people. You really could be doing some other things, and by the way, I bet if you met this guy, you find out he's more like you than you think. He lives in your neighborhood. She's right around the corner. You all eat the same thing. You all grew up the same way, but you're hating on each other. And I think in part because no one has said, you're worthy of somebody's attention. It's okay. And that's a real vital thing. There's that presence again, the presence of somebody in the neighborhood. And I guess maybe what it did for me when I saw this report was I was that guy. I was that kid. I can still remember this woman, Miss Nancy. Miss Nancy lived a couple floors up from us. She was the only person I knew in my life who had gone to college. And she was the only person who really just plainly said, "Are you going to college?" And that was one of those things that kind of shook me a little bit. Me? Are you going to college? And that was a huge sort of thing. And she says, "Hey, let's go do what college people do." And she took me out for a cup of tea
Yeah.
and chatted with me about what college was like. And it, wow, wow. You're right. I think you're absolutely right. Other thoughts?
Well, I
And we
think
can play that role.
it's really easy to identify some of those people that are going to be leaders that come in your door and have all this passion. It's entirely another to give love to those that push your buttons or show you your own walls, or and yet those are the ones that can maybe the leaders, the dreamers, and they are, to piggyback off what you all are saying, the ones that maybe need that little push or that extra attention. How do you take a step back from your own day and your own stuff to say, wait a second, I know this kid's pushing my buttons big time, but let's try and find another way around. Let's take this as a challenge.
See, I wonder if higher education would recognize or have even a message for young Angela today, young Angela Davis, or young Nelson Mandela, or young troublesome Malcolm Little, who became Malcolm X, young troubled Lech Walesa, young troubled Václav Havel. You know, would higher? Yeah, well, I think we got to ask ourselves: would we even have a compelling message for those folks, or would we dismiss them as pains in the ass? You know, interesting idea.
Well, I think a lot of that depends on how much of a troublemaker you are. And I think, you know, my background is engineering. I'm a geek, okay?
Stop apologizing.
But, you know, if you look, I look at math, say,
Yeah.
and right through math, if a girl messes up on a test in grade 4, I can't do this. If a guy messes up, I didn't try it. I just studied it. If I studied it. And girls outperform guys at every level, all the way to grad school. Then you look at the math department, and where did all the women go? And it's absolutely amazing because on any standardized measure, they outperform the guys. I don't know where I was going with that. What was the big?
Bringing the love.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, well, we were part of my oldest daughter. My son's gonna be the only one found who can read and write. We're all geeks. Yeah, you need that. So the provost had a thing on women and tenure and promotion, and I came out and I said something about, you know, tenure cases and people talking about the writing on the wall, and everybody knows how it's going to go. And sometimes in the department you don't feel your vote, something higher up happening. So new chair or dean of college communications took me aside and said, writing on the wall. And yeah, I've tried really hard with my daughter, and STEM women is tough. And I said, no, you got to convince your daughter or woman that she can kick butt. Getting grades is not it. And I gave her a couple of examples, climbing trees, and a few funny stories, where my daughter felt completely empowered. And by the time she gets to a certain age, if I say anything different, she'll just give it to me. Because, you know, they got to feel empowered to do things. And they got to be able to flip up or... So I think
that's
the
why I say,
troublemakers...
and by the way, embrace the geek. Embrace the wonkiness.
Yeah.
Right? Mastery is important. I mean, embrace that. And
That's
where you swing, man.
Yeah.
That's all right.
So, but you have to... Troublemakers are great because it's fascinating why they're troublemakers.
Yeah.
I think that
They're not fun to hang around.
I think it's because of institutions existing why we have great troublemakers. You know, that's when you're saying what would the response be. And I don't even think they would have to respond. It's just because of their existence. It's just being bureaucracies, institutions, what have you. my constant daily struggle, not that I'm announcing a resignation or anything, but my constant struggle is I often wonder if I should go back to that in which I came, which was a juvenile delinquent counselor. Because I do struggle that I sit there with a student and I almost am like, it's too late. You're either not ready yet to have the conversation, or maybe it's too late to have a you didn't get it at the right time. Again, this is totally my opinions, my projection, but I think that the troublemaking and a lot of the opportunities that we get, there's such a razor-thin moment. The minute that they graduate high school and the minute we accept them, and the parent influence obviously too, that I always wonder, where's the spot that that conversation and the accepting of the conversation and us beginning to grow, so that when they exit the U, as you mentioned, ready to swing, that's what I struggle with, especially on those days that I do think I'm swinging and helping students and we're getting somewhere and I'm seeing a lot of students, but there's always that end of the day feeling of, man, when was that moment? And are they ever going to have the moment?
Now maybe some of that moment is watching you.
Well, hey, perhaps.
Some of that moment might
But
be
yeah,
you.
that's kind of, we receive them, and God, the 18 years prior. I also wonder if they shouldn't be coming to college at 18. I met for the first time a good number of students this past year that did take the gap year, and was that a good thing? Is that a better thing? So, those whole things.
Yeah, I think those moments do matter when you. It's the little things. I think they talk about the fog of war. I think about the fog of college and what I don't remember from college. And I wasn't even drinking. And so what I don't remember is it could fill this room. But the few things that I do, it's moments with people that said something to me or moved me, just nudged me in the right direction, or even asked me, like you said, asked you the question about college. And I think about all the time with something like study abroad and just me asking someone and that changing their trajectory and saying, oh, should I do that? Okay, let's talk about it. Whether it be, and not necessarily that I've ever set up a meeting with a student to talk about study abroad, but it comes up in conversations because if I'm talking with them, I'm getting to know more about them, even if it's because they're planning an event through student activities and that's what I work. But I'm asking them questions about who they are and what they're about, and what they was that you said, Dean Coleman, about the somebody, not the something that they want to be, and I'm asking them questions about that, and you don't know until maybe years later, but you gotta hope that that's making a difference in some way. Those little conversations, those moments, I love those.
And Robert, maybe that's how we address that fear, right? So much of why students won't take that risk is because of fear, right? Fear versus love, and there's that play that Gandhi talked about with fear and love. Love, of course, being stronger than fear, but why do people get afraid about going abroad? Because there's going to be a massive breakdown in my life. There's going to be massive failure. I'm going to miss something. There's going to be all these things that are wrong about it, and they don't think about what an immersive experience like that, if you really jump into it, you're going to find something different that you might love that you didn't even know was out there. You're going to find a way that fits into your life that you never could have imagined, as long as you're open. As long as you're open. I know plenty of students who go abroad and think that they're going to eat McDonald's every day, right? Or I got to have a Coke every night, or that kind of stuff. But maybe that's how we address the fears. That we push people to say no, 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 no. And by the way, what's the worst thing that's going to happen if you do fail? That's that other question you got. These are logical, analytical people. What's the worst thing that's going to happen if you do mess this up? This environment's a great place to mess stuff up, right? Because we pick you up, we give you a Kleenex, we wipe your nose, we give you a little hug, and we say, it's bad, but. We always put a little but in there. I don't have a whole lot of circumstances where I got to say to a student, this is so bad that I can't help you. There are plenty of times when I say, yeah, it's bad, but let's work through it. Let's put some context in your life. You're young. This is the time, by the way, to do this. Now, by the way, when you leave here, other people are not going to appreciate this. And they're not going to do much for you. And I think that's where we show the love in the acts. So maybe this is it. I think we have to think about, well, what does failure mean, right? And what success mean? A lot of us don't even think about those sorts of things. What does it mean? You know, we live in this entrepreneurial world. And entrepreneurs will tell you constantly that, yeah, you gotta figure failure in. You just do, you have to. Hey, engineers, you have to figure failure
Go
in.
learn.
Right. You have to do it. Problem is that we grow up, we also have a world, I'm included in it, where I don't let my children fail the way they should. I gotta admit, I let them, I do a lot of behind the scenes things. Their wife is worse, my wife is worse. But they come to this place in a time, and then all of a sudden they're in this place and time where someone says, okay, your mother's not here.
But that's the biggest thrill. Like this semester, my
For me,
son's-
for you, that was the thrill, right? For
No,
me,
no,
when I went
no.
to college, I was like, my mother is not here.
Hell, I'm talking, you're talking
And we
about
didn't have
parents.
cell phones, so it was great.
So my son's doing a study abroad semester at AUB, and three kids were going to go from BU, Syria, on the horizon. He's the only one who went. It's an amazing experience just to see him, you know. And you know, I'm thinking he's going to be sitting there scared, and everybody's going to be ready to kidnap him because he's an American, whatever. And because the arguments he has, because there's another guy from Austin, Texas, and some guy is laying into them about Americans, and my son just blurts out, you know, between here and Pakistan, there's less distance in Boston and Austin. No, impossible. And it turns out my son's right. The arguments he's getting into people in the Middle East, it is just amazing. I just hope he comes back safe at the end of the semester. But it is amazing to see what happens when you just throw them into a place.
That's right. How about that? And that mission they do is absolutely wonderful. So we got to wrap it up. One last thing. I say love your students, but we have to love ourselves, and we have to love what we do. The minute you think that a young person around here is a pain in the ass, the minute that it just doesn't work for you anymore, I caution you. First off, come see me, and then secondly, you know, you got to think about what we're doing here. You cannot, I think, have that kind of sentiment that we want for our students, that we want for a community, if you think these people are really pains in the neck for you. So, love yourself, love what you do, and the acts and deeds will push forward in terms of a way that we keep this community looking more like a college and less like that. And we still have a ways to go, but we still try as much as we can.
Okay, thank you very much.